Cops and other law enforcement people of Reddit, what were some cases you worked on that made you think, even if for a moment, that something supernatural, paranormal was going on? I have posted this before, but here is my possessed woman story. Spoiler alert. As a result of posting this last time, users suggested she could have suffered from catatonic schizophrenia. Was driving along and found a girl just standing in the middle of the road. My initial thoughts was to tell her to pay attention, but it was clear that while the lights were on, nobody was home. During my whole time with her, she never uttered a word. I was left in a weird situation. She had done nothing, clearly needed help, but medically nothing seemed wrong. As I am pondering what on earth I should do, the girl suddenly starts spinning. Now, spinning is not illegal, and I'm starting to think this girl is one of those protesters that wind up police. I've dealt with Troll Station before, so I think crack on, spin to your heart's content. Then she loses her balance and falls, whacking her head on the side of the police car. Great. So I call an ambulance, but she seems fine. Still not talking, but she is looking up at the sky. It's a nice day, so fine, enjoy the sun. I do some writing and look back at her now, bright red face and watering eyes, and realize she is trying to damage her retinas by forcing herself to look directly at the sun. That's a new one on me, so now I'm holding a book or something above her to shield her eyes. Ambulance arrives and we get to hospital, and now she has forgotten how to walk. Now I'm 99% sure she is a wind-up merchant, but I get her a wheelchair. In the wheelchair, she strikes up a "I'm a little teapot" pose and keeps this up for the next hour, zero movement, just frozen with her arms out. So I now have 3 potential situations. She is pretending to be frozen in time. She is suffering from a mental health issue. She has been possessed. By now I'm convinced it's the latter, but I section her and leave her with professionals. A week later I call the hospital and they tell me she is still frozen. My brother is a deputy, and at the time I worked as an EMT for a few small towns in northeast Colorado. I frequently went on ride-alongs with him while waiting for 911 calls to come in. This took place in Amherst, Colorado. The town is very small. Amherst has about 50 people, a church, some houses, a grain tower, and a park. It was about 3 a.m., and we were about to call it a night. As we were making our last check on Amherst, we noticed movement at the park, but couldn't tell exactly what was going on because it was pitch black. We drove up and stopped alongside the dirt road, flipped on the spotlight, and as we moved the light around the park, it finally settled on the back of a young girl, maybe 13, sitting on a swing with her back facing us. We left the spotlight on her. She wasn't moving. She just sat there facing away from us, looking down at the ground. Needless to say, it was a very creepy situation. We both looked at each other with that face you would make when something is out of the ordinary. I quickly suggested that we should call her over using the PA system. He agreed. As we looked back over, she was gone. I mean, no signs of anyone anywhere. The park was in a wide open area. She couldn't have gotten out of sight in the amount of time that we had our exchange of words. I remember saying, "Should we get out and look for her?" Maybe she hid behind one of the park toys or something. My brother just looked at me and said, "Hell to the no," and drove away. It still creeps me out to this day. Obligatory. Not my story, but my uncle's. Years ago, my uncle told us about a woman who would call the police station just about every night claiming that fairies or elves were breaking into her house and stealing her food. As is custom, every time she calls, they send a unit to check on her. My uncle gets it about 2-3 times per week. Every night they stop by her house and reassure her that no one has broken in and calm her down. One night when he gets to the house, she has poured powdered sugar all over the floor to record their tracks, and my uncle says he literally has to do a double take. All over the floor of her kitchen are these little tracks, tiny like nothing he's seen before. His partner starts taking photos and trying to figure it out. A few other officers come in, as most of them had gotten the call to her house too and want to see it. 10 police officers, all completely baffled as to what these weird little prints are. Turns out a possum had babies, and they were sneaking into her kitchen for warmth or food. The prints looked so foreign because most of the time baby possums are carried by their mother, not running around. 7 are rounded up and released in a less residential area. Police officer working the desk, 1500 to 2300. Fire alarm signal goes off. Many, many years ago, the police department offered alarm monitoring service, still had 12 places that were hardwired, and it would require pulling apart a lot of equipment to disconnect the system, so we just kept it going. First shift dispatch is already punched in, so she took it. I'm headed out the door to the fire department when 911 rings from the same address. I answer it. No one in the other end, assumed they barely got to call before passing out. I bolt out the back door, hop in a squad car, radio in the 911 call on Channel 3 that both police fire can hear, and that I'm going directly to the house. Arrive just as another unit shows up. No signs of smoke, no sign of anything. Older woman comes walking up the street pushing a wheelchair with an elderly lady, her mother. They live there and just went out for an early evening stroll before dinner. Tell them what we have going on. Nobody else lives there. And as far as the elderly lady can remember, the alarm was disconnected from the house years ago during some renovations. They don't have any alarm system either, just a couple of smoke fire detectors. We do a walk around the house, get to the back door off the kitchen, and you can clearly see and smell gas. We turned off the gas at the main, set up some fans to air it out, and find a cracked gas line going to the oven. Daughter said she spilled some coffee she was making for their walk, and had to move the oven a few inches to clean, probably broke the line pushing the oven back in. Nothing else in the house is disturbed, and both phones are on the hook. Fire chief shows up about 15 minutes into the call. He goes over to the two ladies and gives them both a hug. He's nearly in tears. The elderly lady in the wheelchair, her husband was the fire chief 60-plus years ago for our department. The daughter, her husband passed away a few years ago. He was also a member of our department. Never believed in ghosts or spirits, but that call made me think maybe people who spend their lives doing good are allowed by some power to look over their loved ones every so often. Cop. Real call. I have been on patrol for several years and love stuff like this. I had a backup officer with me who witnessed everything. Dispatch sent me to a call in a mountain area late one night. Dispatch said the caller reported several people holding a baby above their heads and chanting while standing on her property. The call sounded ridiculous, and I smirked as dispatch gave the details. I arrived at the proper address after driving about 20 minutes along a mountain road. There is not much else up here, and it was extremely quiet. No one walks around out here, and there aren't very many cars driving this late. I walked along a gated driveway through a light wooded area. I found the caller's house with two dim lights near the front door. The house was surrounded on three sides by heavy woods. I felt a little uneasy, just looking at the house. I knocked on the front door of the house while standing on a large patio. I heard something move to my left, which startled me because it was close. It sounded like a person, something big. I looked to the left and used my flashlight to light up the patio. I didn't see anyone. I continued to knock. I could hear two voices inside the house. I clearly heard a male and a female. This made me feel a little better. I thought I heard someone on the patio, but it must have been someone inside. The female eventually opened the door. She was terrified, almost crying. She asked me to come inside and to close the door. She led me to the living room where I saw a very cheap security monitor, almost like a baby monitor camera setup, with audio and video playing. The camera setup only provided live feed. The camera was positioned to view the front door and patio area where I was just standing. The audio was silent as I watched the monitor for a few seconds. The woman began to explain when I interrupted and asked where the male was inside the house. I heard his voice. She looked confused and said she was here alone. I was surprised because I know for a fact I heard a male's voice when I knocked. I asked her several times and initially thought she was lying to me. My partner checked the house and did not find anyone. The woman said she was reading while sitting on the couch when she heard something over the security camera. She looked at the display and saw two people on the patio, standing at the front door. She heard knocking at the door and called the police. I looked at the monitor, and although it was low quality, I could see the patio and front door area with decent clarity. As the woman continued to explain, the audio on the monitor went from quiet to extremely loud. We all stopped talking. The caller was shaking. I looked at the monitor but didn't see anyone. Loud audio continued to blast from the speakers. The audio sounded like wind, but it was not windy that night. I asked the woman, "What is that?" And she said, "It's them." I looked at my partner, who was nervous. The woman gives me her cell phone, stating she took pictures of the monitor, showing the two people on her patio. I looked through several low-quality pics and didn't see anything. I continue to scroll, and sure enough, I see what looks like two tall figures standing at the door. One of the figures is holding something. The figures looked strange, all dark and featureless, in contrast to the video I saw on the monitor. I was in disbelief and thought, "Oh my God, she's telling the truth." I continued to scroll and saw one figure holding something up over its head. Another picture showed the item at the base of the door with both figures standing near it. I tried to reason, to explain what could have caused these images, but it was pretty apparent that there had been two subjects on her patio. We check outside, walking the property to the tree line. I mention the movement on the patio and the male's voice from inside the house. My partner asks me to stop talking about it. We finish checking and return to speak with the caller. She says she will be driving into town and staying at a hotel because she is too scared to stay here tonight. We walk along the driveway back to our cars. My partner jumps into the patrol car and takes off. I laughed, but I felt really uneasy, standing there in the dark. I leave shortly afterward. Cop here. Partner and I were dispatched to a welfare check. Elderly guy, nobody had seen him in a few days, mail overflowing in mailbox, missed a doctor's appointment, car hasn't moved, etc. We both know we are about to find a body. We arrive on scene and can't get anyone to the door, look through the window, and sure enough, we can see his foot on the floor in the living room. My partner is a corporal and pulls rank and makes me go first. Door is unlocked, and as soon as we open it, we smell a mostly fresh, dead body. Almost relieved, we both enter and he tells me to check vitals on dead dude. He is obviously dead, with lividity, dried feces on him, and dried saliva around his mouth. So I go to stand over him and see if I can get a pulse, at which point he takes a deep breath, rolls over, and asks why we are in his house. At this point, we both start screaming, "Oh shits," and "what the fucks," as we both run out of the house. We called EMS and they transported him, said they couldn't get a blood pressure or pulse on him. I think he died a week later in the hospital. I still get jokes about raising the dead. Not sure if you guys would want to hear an Asian story, but I thought it's worth sharing. This was told by my dad when I was 12. Even now, when I ask him about the story, he can remember every vivid detail like it just happened last week. My dad was in the police force for 20 years, and when we just a rookie, he had to conduct nighttime roadblocks meant to catch drunk drivers. They had done it many times before, and this night started routine enough for them. That was until this Toyota Corolla drove up to them, with what looked like a white blanket on its roof, flapping in the wind. They thought it was weird, but did not see anything amiss about it. One of them even joked that this guy was multitasking by drying his laundry and driving home at the same time. The laughs stopped when the lone car came closer, and all of them saw what looked like a woman in white lying face down on top of the car. The woman seemed to slide like a slug backwards until she disappeared behind the car, as it eventually came to a stop in front of them. It took a few minutes for my dad's team to recompose themselves as they stared at each other as if to say, "You guys saw that, right?" The most senior of them finally stepped up and shot the usual questions to the driver. There was a noticeable quiver in his voice as he made conversation and asked him to step out of the vehicle. My dad's team inspected the whole vehicle, including the boot, and found nothing strange in it. The driver was a good-looking staff sergeant in the Army who was heading home from a company event earlier that night and admitted to have had a few cans of beer. He said he laid down in his bunk to sleep it off, hence why he was driving home at that time. It was 4 a.m. He passed their sobriety test, and they started to ask him if he saw anything weird during his drive. Initially, he said no, but after more questioning, he mentioned that he had to swerve to avoid what looked like a bird that was flying upside down. It was spooky, but didn't think that was a detail worth sharing with police officers. The senior then told the guy to chill out at a 24-hour coffee shop before heading home. The locals believe that if a malevolent spirit follows you, making a pit stop confuses them so they can't set up shop in your house. After some confusion of his own, the driver finally caught on and nodded in agreement. After the guy leaves, they call into the station and cut the night short. Never knew what happened to the driver. Thanks for watching. Make sure to leave your stories in the comments section. I'd love to make a video about them in the future. Make sure to like and subscribe too.